Thomas Massie tries to quiz Pam Bondi on Constitution. She schools him with amendments. The marble columns of the packed congressional hearing room seemed to hum with tension. Cameras clicked, papers rustled, and the air smelled faintly of coffee and nerves. At the center of it all sat Thomas Massie, a man known for his sharp wit and deep dives into constitutional law. Across from him was Pam Bondi, former Attorney General of Florida, calm as a still lake yet with eyes that hinted at unshakable resolve. The two had crossed paths in debates before, but this was different. Today, Massie had come armed with what he believed was a foolproof strategy: grill Bondi on the U.S. Constitution, corner her in front of a live national audience, and walk away with a soundbite that would trend for days. Ms. Bondi, Massie began with a measured voice, "I'm sure you're familiar with the 10th Amendment." Pam's lips curved into the faintest smile. "I am," she replied softly, her tone respectful but certain. Massie fired his first question like a shot. "Then explain how you reconcile the federal government's overreach with states' rights in the context of." Pam gently raised a hand, not to interrupt, but to steady the pace. "Congressman," she said, "I'll answer that. But I think it's only fair we start with the First Amendment, because without the freedom to stand here and have this very conversation, the rest of them don't matter." The room shifted. A few eyebrows rose. The court reporter paused, fingers hovering over her keys. Pam didn't just answer his question, she wove a story. She spoke about her grandfather, a small-town newspaper editor who had risked his livelihood in the 1960s to print unpopular truths. She described how her mother, a schoolteacher, had taught her that the Bill of Rights wasn't a set of privileges for the powerful, but a shield for the powerless. Massie countered quickly, moving to the Second Amendment. Pam listened without interrupting, then surprised him by agreeing, partially. "Rights," she said, "come with responsibilities. My father taught me that freedom isn't about doing whatever you want, it's about protecting the rights of others, too." By the time Massie reached the Fourth and Fifth Amendments, something unexpected had happened. The battle he had prepared for was turning into a dialogue, one laced with mutual respect. Each time he tried to trap her in a legal technicality, she answered with an amendment and a story. Not legal jargon, but moments from real lives, people she had defended, communities she had seen broken and healed. Then came the emotional pivot. Massie brought up the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law, and asked whether it had truly been honored in modern America. Pam's expression softened. She told the story of a young man wrongfully accused, facing life in prison, who had no resources, no family nearby, and no one willing to believe him. She had taken his case pro bono, not because she thought she could win, but because she couldn't stand the thought of him standing alone. Her voice caught just slightly as she recalled the day the jury declared him innocent. "He walked out into the sunlight," she said, "and the first thing he did was hug the bailiff, the same man who had escorted him in chains every morning for 6 months. That's the Constitution in action, Congressman. That's equal protection, not just words, lives." The room was silent. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. Massie leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from challenge to contemplation. "Pam," he said, breaking the formality for the first time, "I think you just reminded all of us why we're here." Pam smiled. Not a victorious smile, but a humble one. "It's not about winning an argument," she replied. "It's about making sure the rights we talk about in this room actually reach the people outside of it." When the hearing ended, something remarkable happened. Instead of rushing out to give separate press statements, Massie and Bondi walked out side by side. Outside, a small crowd had gathered: students, veterans, everyday citizens holding pocket-sized copies of the Constitution. One young woman, holding hers with both hands, asked for Pam's autograph. Pam signed it, then handed the pen to Massie. "Sign it with me," she said. He hesitated, then grinned and added his name beneath hers. 2 signatures under the same preamble. 2 very different viewpoints, one shared belief that the Constitution wasn't just parchment in a museum, but a living promise. As they left, Pam glanced at the crowd and said quietly, "You know, the real amendments aren't just written in ink. They're written in how we treat each other." And for once, the cameras caught not a clash of egos, but something rarer: two people from opposite sides of the political spectrum walking away not as opponents, but as guardians of the same idea. Message. Kindness doesn't weaken conviction, it strengthens it. In the end, it's not the debates we win that define us, but the people we uplift along the way. All right. Let's continue the story right from that moment outside the hearing, keeping the emotional flow alive and deepening the message. The sun was beginning to set over Washington, casting a warm golden glow across the Capitol steps. The light caught the edges of the crowd's faces, highlighting a quiet shift in the atmosphere. What had started as a tense, combative political event had somehow turned into something softer, almost hopeful. Pam and Thomas walked slowly down the steps, stopping every few feet as people approached. A middle-aged man in a faded veteran's cap saluted Massie and quietly thanked him for standing up for the Second Amendment. Massie nodded, but then surprised the man by gesturing to Pam. "She'll tell you," he said, "the rights we protect mean nothing unless we make sure everyone gets to use them." Pam shook the man's hand, her grip warm and steady. "Sir," she said, "the Constitution is yours just as much as mine. That's why we fight for it together." Further down the steps, a young immigrant mother stood nervously, holding her daughter's hand. The girl clutched a small American flag, the kind handed out at naturalization ceremonies. She didn't speak much English, but she managed to say, "Thank you, for freedom." Pam crouched down to meet the girl's eyes. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "freedom means you get to dream big, and no one can take that away." The girl smiled shyly and hugged her. Cameras clicked, but for once, it wasn't for headlines, it was because something real had happened. As the crowd began to thin, Pam and Thomas found themselves walking alone toward the sidewalk. "You know," Thomas said with a half-smile, "I had a dozen gotcha questions lined up. You knocked them down with stories. I didn't see that coming." Pam chuckled. "Facts win arguments, Thomas. Stories win people." They stopped at the corner where their cars were waiting. For a moment, neither moved. The city around them kept humming. Taxis honking, footsteps on pavement, muffled chatter from nearby restaurants. "You think we'll ever get back to a place where this," Thomas gestured back toward the Capitol, "is more about people than politics?" Pam's gaze followed his hand, then returned to his face. "Only if enough of us remember that the Constitution isn't a weapon, it's a promise. And promises are meant to be kept." Thomas extended his hand. She shook it firmly. "I'll hold you to that," he said. "You'd better," she replied, smiling. As they drove away in separate cars, neither noticed the small group of students still sitting on the Capitol steps, passing around that signed pocket Constitution. They were reading it out loud, amendment by amendment, and in their young voices, the words sounded less like dusty history and more like something alive, something worth protecting. And perhaps, without realizing it, Pam and Thomas had just given them more than a political lesson. They'd given them an example. Because in the end, the most powerful amendments aren't the ones added to the Constitution, they're the ones we make in ourselves.